Welcome to our channel of terror and dread, where spine-chilling tales come to life. Brace yourselves, viewers, for you are about to embark on a journey of fear and suspense. We advise against watching alone, lest you risk the haunting shadows that may linger long after the screen fades to black. Remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Our stories, though true, have been cloaked in anonymity to protect the innocent. Get ready to uncover the mysteries that lurk beneath the surface of ordinary lives. The Prophetic Dream. From a young age, Dr. Olivia Carter was haunted by the same recurring nightmare. She would find herself in a world overrun by zombies, the undead ravaging cities and spreading their infection to every corner of the globe. In her dream, Olivia would run through deserted streets, searching for survivors and desperately trying to find a cure. The images were vivid and terrifying, and each time she awoke, she could still feel the cold grip of fear. Her parents dismissed the dreams as a child's overactive imagination, but Olivia knew there was something more to them. She felt a deep, unshakable conviction that these nightmares were a premonition of a future catastrophe. As she grew older, this belief only strengthened, and she dedicated her life to studying infectious diseases and virology, determined to be ready when the time came. Despite her impressive academic credentials, Olivia's colleagues in the scientific community viewed her theories about a zombie pandemic with skepticism and disdain. They called her ideas fringe beliefs and science fiction, ridiculing her at conferences and in peer-reviewed journals. But Olivia was undeterred. She continued her research in secret, building an underground lab and preparing for the day her nightmare would become a reality. Years of isolation and ridicule had taken their toll on Olivia, but she remained vigilant. Then, one fateful evening, her worst fears began to unfold. She received a frantic call from her sister, Anna, who was in hysterics. Anna's husband, Mark, had fallen severely ill with a mysterious fever. His skin had turned a sickly gray, and he was exhibiting violent, erratic behavior. Olivia's heart raced as she listened to Anna describe Mark's symptoms. It was happening. The pandemic she had feared her entire life was starting. She knew she had to act quickly if there was any hope of developing a cure. Without hesitation, Olivia packed her medical supplies and drove to Anna's house. The situation was worse than she had imagined. Mark was restrained in their bedroom, thrashing against his bonds and snarling like a wild animal. His eyes were bloodshot, and his skin was mottled with dark veins. "I'm taking him to my lab," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "It's the only way I can help him." Anna was too distraught to argue. She nodded and helped Olivia carry Mark to the car. They drove to the remote cabin where Olivia had built her underground research facility. The cabin, nestled deep in the woods, was the perfect cover for her secret lab. As they descended into the basement, Olivia's mind raced with the enormity of what lay ahead. The basement of the log cabin opened into a state-of-the-art laboratory, hidden beneath layers of concrete and steel. Olivia had spared no expense in equipping the lab with the latest technology and security measures. She and Anna secured Mark in a containment chamber designed for high-risk pathogens. As Olivia activated the biometric locks, she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt for what she was about to do. But the world was at stake, and she couldn't let her emotions cloud her judgment. Anna looked around the lab, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Olivia, what is all this? How did you know this would happen?" Olivia took a deep breath. "I've been preparing for this for years, Anna. I had dreams, visions, of a zombie pandemic. No one believed me, so I built this lab to be ready when the time came." Anna stared at her, speechless. Finally, she managed to say, "You really think you can find a cure?" "I have to," Olivia replied. "There's no other choice." Over the next few days, Olivia threw herself into her work. She collected samples from Mark, analyzing his blood and tissue for any clues about the nature of the infection. The virus was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was incredibly aggressive, attacking the body's cells with unprecedented speed and ferocity. As she pored over the data, Olivia realized that developing an antidote would be a monumental task. Meanwhile, Anna stayed by Mark's side, watching helplessly as his condition deteriorated. He grew more violent and unrecognizable with each passing hour, his humanity slipping away. It was a heartbreaking transformation, and Anna's hair turned white overnight from the stress and trauma. The days turned into weeks as Olivia worked tirelessly in her underground lab. She tested countless combinations of antiviral drugs, gene therapies, and experimental treatments, but nothing seemed to halt the virus's relentless progression. Mark's condition continued to worsen, and he was no longer the man they had known. His eyes were empty, his skin cold and clammy. One evening, as Olivia reviewed the latest test results, Anna approached her with a look of desperation. "Olivia, we need to talk. Mark, he's suffering. We can't keep him like this." Olivia knew Anna was right, but the thought of giving up on Mark was unbearable. "I'm close, Anna. I just need more time." "We don't have time," Anna said, her voice cracking. "He's in pain, and we're not helping him. What if this is just the beginning? What if we can't stop it?" Olivia felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had dedicated her life to preparing for this moment, but the reality was far more challenging than she had ever imagined. She looked at Anna, seeing the toll this ordeal had taken on her sister. Anna's once vibrant hair was now stark white, and her eyes were hollow with grief. With a heavy heart, Olivia made a decision. She would have to make the ultimate sacrifice for the greater good. She couldn't let Mark's suffering continue, nor could she risk the infection spreading further. She had to find a way to end this nightmare, even if it meant making unthinkable choices. Olivia developed a plan that would push her to her limits. She prepared a final experimental treatment, a risky gene therapy that could either cure Mark or end his suffering. As she administered the treatment, she felt a profound sense of dread. If this didn't work, it would be the end of her hopes and dreams. Anna watched from the observation room, her eyes filled with tears. Olivia felt a pang of guilt, knowing that she was putting her sister through unimaginable pain. But there was no other way. She had to see this through to the end. Hours passed as Olivia monitored Mark's vital signs, waiting for any sign of improvement. The treatment was taking a toll on him, and his body convulsed violently. Olivia prayed for a miracle, but deep down she knew the chances were slim. In the early hours of the morning, Mark's body went still. Olivia rushed to his side, her heart pounding. She checked his pulse and found nothing. He was gone. Anna collapsed in tears, and Olivia felt her own resolve crumble. She had failed. Despite all her efforts and sacrifices, she couldn't save Mark. The weight of her failure was crushing, and she knew that the nightmare was far from over. As she comforted her grieving sister, Olivia's mind raced with the implications of her failure. The virus was out there, spreading and mutating. She had to find a way to stop it, but she was running out of time and resources. She felt a growing sense of dread, knowing that the worst was yet to come. With Mark's death, Olivia's determination took on a desperate edge. She continued her research, pushing herself to the brink of exhaustion. She experimented with new combinations of drugs and therapies, hoping to find a breakthrough. But the virus was relentless, and every failure took a toll on her spirit. One evening, as she was working in the lab, Anna approached her with a haunted look in her eyes. "Olivia, I don't feel well." Olivia's blood ran cold. She immediately ran tests on Anna, fearing the worst. Her worst fears were confirmed when the results came back. Anna had been infected with the virus. Olivia's mind raced as she tried to comprehend the enormity of what this meant. She had lost Mark, and now she was losing Anna. Desperate to save her sister, Olivia worked around the clock. She refused to let Anna suffer the same fate as Mark. But the virus was faster and more aggressive than ever. It ravaged Anna's body, and despite Olivia's best efforts, there was nothing she could do to stop it. As Anna's condition worsened, Olivia faced an unbearable choice. She could either continue her futile attempts to save Anna, or she could end her suffering. The thought of losing her sister was too much to bear, but she knew she couldn't let Anna endure the same agony as Mark. With a heavy heart, Olivia made the hardest decision of her life. She prepared a dose of a powerful sedative, knowing it would bring an end to Anna's suffering. As she administered the injection, tears streamed down her face. Anna's breathing slowed, and she slipped into a peaceful sleep. Olivia held her sister's hand, feeling the life slip away. She had failed to save the people she loved most, and the weight of her failure was crushing. She had dedicated her life to preparing for this moment, but in the end, it had all been in vain. The underground lab was silent, the only sound the hum of the equipment. Olivia sat alone in the darkness, her dreams shattered and her heart broken. She had fought so hard, but the nightmare had become a reality, and there was no escaping it. As the virus continued to spread, Olivia knew that she had to keep fighting. She had to find a way to stop the infection and save what was left of humanity. But with every passing day, her hope dwindled, and the burden of her failures grew heavier. She was isolated and alone, the weight of the world's suffering pressing down on her. Olivia couldn't allow herself to succumb to despair, though. She channeled her grief and guilt into her work, knowing that the stakes were too high to give up. She doubled down on her research, pushing herself beyond her physical and mental limits. The lab became her prison, the walls closing in on her as she chased an elusive cure. One day, as Olivia was working in the lab, she received an unexpected visit. It was Dr. Jacob Harris, a former colleague who had been one of her most vocal critics. His hair, once dark and full, was now stark white, a testament to the stress and fear that had gripped him. "Olivia," Jacob said, his voice trembling. "I was wrong. We were all wrong. The virus. It's spreading faster than we ever imagined. We need your help." Olivia looked at him, her eyes hollow and devoid of the spark that had once driven her. "You didn't believe me," she said quietly. "None of you did. And now it's too late." Jacob's face crumpled in anguish. "Please, Olivia. You're the only one who can help us. I know I've made mistakes, but we need to put that behind us. The world needs you." Despite her anger and resentment, Olivia knew that she couldn't turn her back on humanity. She agreed to work with Jacob and his team, sharing her research and collaborating on potential treatments. The lab became a hive of activity, scientists working around the clock in a desperate race against time. But the virus was always one step ahead. Every time they thought they had made a breakthrough, the virus mutated, rendering their efforts useless. The infection spread like wildfire, and the world descended into chaos. Cities fell, governments collapsed, and society unraveled. In the midst of the turmoil, Olivia clung to a fragile hope. She continued her work, driven by the memory of Mark and Anna and the millions of others who had been lost. She knew that finding a cure was the only way to honor their memory and save the remnants of humanity. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Olivia's hope began to fade. The virus was relentless, and the world was slipping away. She felt the weight of her failures pressing down on her, and the guilt of the lives she couldn't save. One night, as Olivia worked alone in the lab, she was struck by a sudden realization. She had been so focused on finding a cure that she had neglected the human cost of her work. She had lost sight of the people she was trying to save, and in doing so, she had lost herself. With a heavy heart, Olivia made a final, desperate decision. She would use herself as a test subject, injecting herself with the latest experimental treatment. It was a risky and unproven method, but she had nothing left to lose. As the treatment coursed through her veins, Olivia felt a surge of pain and heat. Her body convulsed, and she collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. She could feel the virus and the treatment waging war inside her, a battle for her very soul. For hours she lay there, her mind slipping in and out of consciousness. Memories of Mark, Anna, and her childhood dreams flashed before her eyes. She felt a deep sense of regret and longing, a yearning for the life she had lost. In her final moments, Olivia realized that she had been fighting a losing battle all along. The virus was too powerful, too relentless. It had taken everything from her, and in the end, it had won. As the darkness closed in, Olivia took one last shuddering breath. The lab was silent, a grim testament to her life's work and the sacrifices she had made. The world outside continued to fall apart, and the nightmare she had feared since childhood had become a horrifying reality. And so the story ended in sorrow and despair, with no promise of a brighter future. The virus continued its rampage, unchecked and unstoppable, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. The sacrifices of those who had fought against it were forgotten, their names lost to history. In the end, Olivia's dream of saving humanity remained just that, a dream. The world was left to face the horrors of the pandemic, with no hope of a cure and no end in sight. Olivia gasped for air as her eyes shot open. She found herself lying in her own bed, drenched in sweat, her heart racing. For a moment, she couldn't distinguish reality from the nightmare that had just consumed her. The vivid images of the virus, the lab, and the losses she had endured lingered in her mind. She sat up, her hands trembling as she clutched the edges of her blanket. Was it all just a dream? Or had she experienced a vision, a premonition of a possible future? She couldn't be sure, but the intensity of the experience left her shaken to her core. Olivia glanced around her bedroom, taking in the familiar surroundings. Everything appeared normal. The morning sunlight filtering through the curtains, the gentle hum of the air conditioning, the faint sound of birds chirping outside. It was a stark contrast to the chaos and despair she had just witnessed in her dream. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The dream had felt so real, so immediate. It was as if she had lived through years of torment in a single night. But now, back in the safety of her home, she wondered if it had been a warning, a glimpse into a potential future she had to prevent. Determined not to let the dream fade into obscurity, Olivia reached for her journal and began to write down every detail she could remember. The images, the emotions, the scientific breakthroughs and failures. It all poured out onto the pages. She needed to make sense of it, to understand what it all meant. As she wrote, Olivia's mind began to clear. The dream, though terrifying, had given her a sense of purpose. She had seen the consequences of inaction, the devastation that could unfold if the world wasn't prepared for such a pandemic. She couldn't ignore the warning. She had to act. With renewed determination, Olivia decided to pursue her research with even greater fervor. She would continue her work on infectious diseases, but with a broader focus, seeking to understand and prevent a wide range of potential threats. And this time, she would find a way to gain the support and cooperation of her colleagues. She couldn't afford to be dismissed as a fringe scientist any longer. Olivia knew the path ahead would be challenging, but she was no stranger to adversity. The dream had shown her the stakes, and she was resolved to do everything in her power to prevent such a nightmare from becoming reality. It was time to turn her fears into action, to use her knowledge and skills to protect the world from the horrors she had glimpsed in her sleep. As the sun continued to rise, casting a warm glow over her room, Olivia felt a sense of hope. The nightmare had been a harrowing experience, but it had also given her a chance to change the future. She would not let it go to waste. With her journal in hand and a heart full of resolve, she began to plan her next steps, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And though she didn't know what the future held, Olivia was determined to be prepared. The nightmare had been a warning, and she intended to heed it. The fight to save humanity was far from over, but she was ready to take on the challenge, one step at a time. The Unseen Guardian. The last boxes were finally loaded onto the moving truck. The once vibrant coastal home, now emptied, seemed like a ghost of its former self. Jax looked around, taking in the final moments of what had been his life until now. He was a teenager, his dark hair hanging over his eyes as he took one last glance at the horizon. The waves crashing against the shore had always been a source of comfort, but now they were a distant memory. The new house, tucked away in the dense woods of inland Massachusetts, felt like an alien world. "Jax, it's time to go," his father called out. His voice was weary, the strain of long work hours and the burden of raising two kids alone evident in his tone. Jax's little sister, Eerily, was already in the car, her privileged life barely touched by the upheaval. Jax felt a pang of jealousy mixed with protectiveness. The drive was long and winding, the coastal roads giving way to thick forests. Jax's thoughts drifted to his Yaya, his grandmother, the only one who seemed to understand him. She had always been his rock, her stories of the old country a bridge to his heritage. He would miss her more than anything. The new house was grand but cold. It stood at the end of a long path, surrounded by towering trees. The forest here felt different, older, as if it held secrets that had been buried for centuries. As they unpacked, Jax noticed the path leading deeper into the woods. He felt an inexplicable pull, a need to explore. A week passed before Jax finally ventured down the path on his motorcycle. The engine's roar echoed through the trees, a stark contrast to the silence of the forest. He sped along, the thrill of the ride momentarily washing away his unease. The path twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the woods. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around him. Jax came to a clearing and stopped, the bike idling beneath him. The place felt strange, the ground uneven and littered with stones. He dismounted, curiosity getting the better of him. As he walked, he noticed markings on the trees, ancient symbols he couldn't understand. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying a language he didn't know but felt deep in his bones. He spent hours there, losing track of time. It was only when the sun began to set that he decided to head back. As he turned to leave, he felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced back and saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the tree line. It was dark, featureless, and seemed to blend into the shadows. Jax's heart raced, and he quickly mounted his bike and sped back home. That night, Jax had dreams of the forest. He saw the figure again, standing among the trees, watching him. The dreams felt real, the fear palpable. He woke up in a cold sweat, the sheets tangled around him. He glanced at the clock. It was just past midnight. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. The days passed, but the dreams persisted. Each night they grew more vivid, more terrifying. The figure seemed to come closer, its presence suffocating. Jax began to notice changes in himself as well. His dark hair, once his defining feature, started to show streaks of white. It was subtle at first, but soon it became undeniable. He tried to talk to his Yaya about it during one of their phone calls, but he couldn't find the words. How could he explain something he didn't understand? Instead, he kept it to himself, hoping it would go away. One evening, Jax decided to confront his fears. He rode his bike back to the clearing, the path now familiar. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. He stopped at the edge of the clearing and waited. The figure appeared again, just as it had in his dreams. "Who are you?" Jax called out, his voice shaking. The figure remained silent, unmoving. Jax took a step forward, then another. The figure seemed to retreat, blending into the darkness of the forest. Determined, Jax followed, his fear replaced by a need for answers. He followed the figure through the woods, the trees closing in around him. The air grew colder, the shadows darker. He lost track of time, the forest becoming a maze. Just when he thought he would be lost forever, he stumbled upon an old cabin hidden deep within the woods. The figure was gone, but Jax felt its presence all around him. Jax approached the cabin cautiously. It looked abandoned, the wood rotting and the windows shattered. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. He explored the cabin, finding old furniture and remnants of a life long forgotten. In the corner of the main room, he found a journal. The pages were yellowed with age, the writing faded but still legible. It belonged to someone named Elias, who had lived in the cabin decades ago. The journal detailed strange occurrences, similar to what Jax had experienced. Elias wrote about the figure in the woods, the dreams, and the fear that consumed him. Jax read late into the night, the journal providing some answers, but raising even more questions. Elias had come to believe that the forest was cursed, the ground sacred and disturbed by the construction of the new house. The figure was a guardian of sorts, angered by the intrusion. Jax tried to process this information. The idea of sacred grounds and guardians seemed far-fetched, but the experiences he had were undeniable. The more he read, the more he felt a connection to Elias, as if their lives were intertwined by this mysterious force. Returning home, Jax's thoughts were consumed by the journal. The dreams continued, more intense than before. The figure's presence was overwhelming, and the streaks of white in his hair grew more pronounced. His father and Alana noticed the changes, but attributed them to the stress of the move. One night, unable to sleep, Jax decided to return to the cabin. He needed to understand more, to find a way to stop the haunting. The ride through the dark forest was harrowing, every shadow seeming to move, every rustle in the leaves a whisper. At the cabin, he delved deeper into the journal, discovering rituals and symbols Elias had described to appease the guardian. The entries spoke of offerings, of seeking forgiveness, and of understanding the sacredness of the land. Determined to end the terror, Jax decided to perform the ritual. He gathered the items Elias mentioned: fresh bread, olive oil, wine, and a small carved figure he found in the cabin. The ritual required him to go to the clearing at midnight and offer these items while reciting an ancient prayer. The night was eerily quiet as Jax made his way to the clearing. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy, casting long shadows. He set the items on a makeshift altar of stones and began the ritual. As he recited the prayer, the air grew colder, and the figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Jax's voice trembled, but he continued. The figure moved closer, and he could now see it more clearly. It was humanoid but otherworldly, with eyes that seemed to pierce through him. He finished the prayer and waited, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment there was silence. Then a low, rumbling sound filled the clearing. The figure stood still, its eyes locked onto Jax. He felt a wave of fear, but also a strange sense of peace. The guardian raised its hand, and Jax felt a rush of energy flow through him. The figure began to fade, and the forest seemed to come alive. The trees swayed gently, the leaves rustling in a harmonious symphony. The ground beneath Jax's feet felt warm, as if the forest itself was responding to the ritual. Jax's hair turned completely white in an instant, a final mark of the terror he had faced and the connection he now had with the sacred land. The figure vanished, and the forest returned to its natural state. The next morning, Jax woke up feeling different. The streaks of white in his hair were now a stark contrast to his dark features, but he felt a sense of calm he hadn't known in months. The dreams had stopped, and the figure no longer haunted him. He decided to share his experience with his father and Alana, omitting some of the more terrifying details. His father, though skeptical, noticed the change in Jax and decided to believe his son. Alana, young and imaginative, found the story fascinating and looked up to Jax even more. Life in the new house became easier. The forest, once a source of fear, became a place of solace for Jax. He often visited the clearing, leaving small offerings as a sign of respect. The connection he felt with the land grew stronger, and he found peace in the rhythms of the natural world. Years passed, and Jax grew into a young man. The white hair remained, a constant reminder of the ordeal and the bond he had with the sacred grounds. He stayed close to his family, appreciating the time he had with his yaya and finding new ways to connect with his heritage. However, the forest never lost its mystery, and the fear it once held for Jax never truly disappeared. The night he decided to revisit the cabin, a storm was brewing. The wind howled through the trees, and the sky was a dark, foreboding gray. Jax felt a sense of unease, but something compelled him to go back. He knew the forest better now, knew its paths and its secrets, yet the guardian's presence still lingered in the shadows. He reached the clearing and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The trees seemed to close in around him, and the darkness felt suffocating. As he approached the cabin, he saw that the door was slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. Inside, the cabin was as he remembered it, but the atmosphere was different. The air was thick, almost tangible, with a sense of dread. Jax lit a lantern and began to explore, his heart pounding in his chest. The journal he had read so many years ago lay open on the table, pages fluttering as if caught in an unseen breeze. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him, and the lantern flickered. Jax spun around, the shadows in the room seeming to come alive. The figure appeared again, but this time it was not alone. Dozens of eyes glowed from the darkness, watching him. He could hear whispers, voices speaking in a language he did not understand, but that seemed to pierce his very soul. "Why have you returned?" a voice boomed, not from any of the figures, but from the very walls of the cabin. Jax felt a wave of terror wash over him, his body frozen in place. The figures began to move, closing in on him, their shapes shifting and melding with the shadows. "I came to understand," Jax stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Understanding comes at a price," the voice replied. The shadows surged forward, enveloping Jax in darkness. He felt a cold, clammy hand on his shoulder, and then another on his arm. The eyes of the figures glowed brighter, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Jax's mind raced, trying to remember the rituals, the prayers. He began to recite the words he had memorized, hoping they would offer some protection. The figures paused, their eyes narrowing. For a moment, the cabin was silent, the only sound Jax's labored breathing. Then the voice spoke again, filled with malice. "You have disturbed the sacred grounds. Now you will become one with them." The shadows closed in, and Jax felt himself being pulled into the darkness. His screams echoed through the forest, but there was no one to hear them. The last thing he saw was the guardian, its eyes glowing with a terrible intensity as the world around him faded to black. The next morning, Jax's father and sister found his motorcycle abandoned at the edge of the forest. They searched for him, calling his name, but there was no sign of Jax. The clearing was empty, the cabin untouched, as if he had never been there. Life went on, but the forest remained a place of fear and mystery. People spoke of strange occurrences, of whispers in the night and figures seen in the shadows. The locals began to avoid the path that led to the clearing, warning others to stay away. Years later, a group of hikers stumbled upon the old cabin. Inside, they found Jax's journal, detailing his experiences with the Guardian. The final entry was incomplete, the words trailing off as if he had been interrupted. The hikers left quickly, the sense of dread overwhelming them. The forest kept its secrets, and the Guardian's wrath remained a legend. But those who dared to venture too close would always feel the chill in the air, the sense of being watched. And sometimes, late at night, they would hear the faint echo of a scream, carried on the wind, a reminder of the boy who disappeared into the darkness, never to be seen again. Whispers in the Pines. 3 friends, Alex, Ben, and Kara, set out for a weekend hiking trip in the remote Pinewood Forest in Kentucky, known for its dense trees and untouched nature. The deeper they ventured, the more they felt a sense of unease, as if the forest was alive and watching them. Alex, the group's leader, had always been an avid outdoorsman, but even he felt a chill as they made their way into the heart of the forest. Ben, ever the skeptic, brushed off the feeling, attributing it to the eerie silence that blanketed the woods. Kara, the most sensitive of the trio, couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. "Relax, Kara," Ben said with a chuckle. "It's just a forest." "It's more than that," Kara replied, her voice trembling. "It feels alive." The friends set up camp by a small, serene lake. The reflection of the full moon on the water's surface was mesmerizing, but it did little to ease Kara's growing anxiety. On the second day, they stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin covered in moss and vines. The discovery was both exciting and unsettling. The cabin looked as if it hadn't been touched in decades, yet there was something oddly pristine about it. Inside, they found strange symbols carved into the walls and a journal belonging to a man named Elias, who wrote about voices in the woods and a presence that couldn't be seen but always felt. The entries grew more frantic as they continued, describing how Elias felt his sanity slipping away. "What do you think these symbols mean?" Alex asked, tracing one with his finger. "Maybe some kind of ancient language?" Ben suggested, though he was clearly unnerved. Kara shivered. "We should leave this place. It doesn't feel right." But curiosity got the better of them. They decided to spend another night, hoping to uncover more about Elias's story. That night, they decided to camp near the cabin. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with eerie sounds. Whispers echoed through the trees, and shadows seemed to move on their own. Alex claimed he saw a figure watching them from the tree line, but Ben and Kara dismissed it as paranoia. "Did you hear that?" Kara whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "It's just the wind," Ben said, though his voice lacked conviction. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. It felt as though the forest was closing in on them, the darkness becoming almost tangible. Alex tried to calm his racing heart, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. In the middle of the night, Kara woke up to find Ben missing. She shook Alex awake, and they searched frantically, but Ben was nowhere to be found. Panic set in as they realized they were truly alone, and something was stalking them. "Ben wouldn't just wander off like this," Alex said, his voice shaking. "Something's wrong." They returned to the cabin, hoping Ben had somehow found his way back there. Instead, they found more pages of Elias's journal scattered on the floor. These pages detailed encounters with a malevolent spirit that lived in the woods, preying on those who entered its domain. Returning to the cabin, they discovered more pages of Elias's journal. He wrote about a malevolent spirit that lived in the woods, preying on those who entered its domain. The spirit could mimic voices and create illusions, driving its victims to madness before taking them. "We need to leave now," Kara said, her voice trembling with fear. But as they tried to leave, the forest seemed to conspire against them. The path they had taken to the cabin was gone, replaced by a maze of trees that all looked the same. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. As Alex and Kara tried to leave, they heard Ben's voice calling for help. They followed the voice deeper into the woods, only to find themselves back at the cabin, trapped in a loop. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows closed in. In a final horrifying realization, Alex saw Kara's eyes turn black, and she whispered, "It's already inside me." The spirit had taken Kara, and Alex was next. Alex felt a cold hand on his shoulder, and the last thing he saw was the twisted smile on Kara's face before the darkness consumed him. The forest fell silent, the whispers gone, and Pinewood Forest remained a place of fear where those who dared to enter would never return. The Silent Grove. The Wilson family moved to a secluded house near Silent Grove in upstate New York, a forest known for its beauty and its secrets. The locals warned them about the grove, but they dismissed it as superstition. The house was an old, charming Victorian, with wide verandas and large windows that looked out over the dense woods. The family, Mark, his wife Lisa, their teenage daughter Karen, and their young son Timmy, were excited for a new start, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. On their first night, as they sat down for dinner, they heard a strange melodic sound coming from the forest. It was faint, like a distant lullaby. Timmy, curious and adventurous, wanted to explore, but Mark insisted they stay inside until they knew the area better. The Wilson children, Lily and Sam, explored the grove despite their parents' warnings. They found an ancient stone circle in a clearing, with runes carved into the rocks. That night, both children had the same nightmare of shadowy figures and piercing screams. "Mom, Dad, we found something really cool in the woods today," Timmy said over breakfast. "Really? What did you find?" Mark asked, trying to hide his concern. "An old stone circle with strange carvings. It looked really old," Karen explained, her eyes wide with excitement. Mark and Lisa exchanged worried glances. They had heard the locals' warnings about the grove, but had not taken them seriously. Now they were beginning to wonder if there was more to the stories than they had thought. A mysterious old woman visited the Wilsons, warning them to leave the grove. She spoke of ancient rituals and sacrifices made to keep the forest spirits appeased. The Wilsons, thinking she was just an eccentric, ignored her warnings. "My name is Agatha," she said, her voice trembling with age. "You must leave this place. The spirits are restless." "Thank you for the warning, but we're not going anywhere," Mark said politely, though he felt a chill run down his spine. Agatha's eyes bore into his. "You will regret staying. The grove demands its due." Strange occurrences began. Lily and Sam heard voices calling their names, and the trees seemed to whisper at night. Their father, Mark, started having vivid dreams of the stone circle and blood rituals. The family dog vanished without a trace. "Where's Buddy?" Timmy asked, tears streaming down his face. "We'll find him, Timmy," Lisa said, though she felt a growing sense of dread. The whispers grew louder each night, and the once peaceful house felt oppressive. Karen started sleepwalking, drawn towards the forest. Mark and Lisa were at their wits' end, unsure of what to do. Desperate for answers, Mark and his wife, Emma, researched the history of Silent Grove. They discovered that the grove was once a site of pagan worship, where human sacrifices were made to dark forest spirits. The old woman was a descendant of the original guardians who tried to protect people from the spirits. "This is insane," Lisa said, her hands shaking as she read through old texts. "We need to leave." "But where will we go?" Mark asked. "We've put everything into this house." They decided to confront Agatha, hoping she could help them. But when they arrived at her cottage, they found it abandoned, filled with dusty tomes and jars of strange herbs. One night, Lily and Sam went missing. Mark and Lisa frantically searched the grove, ending up at the stone circle. There they found the children standing in the center, eyes vacant and mouths whispering ancient incantations. The old woman appeared, telling them it was too late. The spirits had claimed the children. The trees closed in around them, and the last thing Mark and Lisa saw was their children's lifeless eyes as the shadows consumed them. The grove fell silent, and the Wilsons were never seen again. Silent Grove remained a place of fear, where the spirits demanded their due, and those who ventured too close would be lost forever. Of the lurking fear. 5 college friends, Tabitha, Jake, Julia, Matt, and Laura, went on a camping trip to Blackwood Forest, West Virginia, an area known for its mysterious disappearances. They set up camp near a picturesque lake, unaware of the forest's dark history. "This place is amazing," Matt said, setting up his tent. "It's so peaceful." "Yeah, but there's something eerie about it," Tabitha replied, looking around. As night fell, they built a campfire and shared stories. The forest seemed to close in around them, the darkness impenetrable beyond the flickering light of the fire. An old park ranger stopped by their camp, warning them not to wander too far from the main trails. He mentioned strange sightings and the disappearance of campers over the years. The friends laughed it off, thinking he was just trying to scare them. "You kids be careful," the ranger said, his face serious. "This forest has a way of swallowing people whole." "Thanks for the tip, but we'll be fine," Jake said, grinning. But as the ranger walked away, a sense of unease settled over the group. That night they heard rustling outside their tents. Tabitha saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the campsite, but when she woke the others, it was gone. They found strange claw marks on the trees around their camp. "Did you see that?" Tabitha whispered, her heart pounding. "It's just your imagination," Jake said, though he didn't sound convinced. The rustling continued, growing louder. The friends huddled together, trying to ignore the growing fear. The next day, Jake and Matt decided to explore deeper into the forest. They found an old hunting cabin with a journal describing a creature that hunted in the forest, invisible to the eye, but leaving a trail of fear and madness. The journal ended abruptly, with the writer begging for forgiveness. "This is creepy," Matt said, flipping through the pages. "Do you think it's real?" "Who knows," Jake replied. "But we should be careful." As they made their way back to camp, they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As night fell, the friends felt an oppressive presence around them. Julia went missing, and when they found her, she was in a trance, muttering about the eyes in the dark. One by one, they started to see glimpses of the creature, glowing eyes, a dark shape moving through the trees. "We need to leave," Tabitha said, her voice trembling. "Now." But the forest seemed to conspire against them. Paths that had been clear during the day were now twisted and unfamiliar. The creature's glowing eyes appeared closer, and the friends' panic grew. In a desperate attempt to escape, the friends ran through the forest, but the creature picked them off one by one. Tabitha, the last survivor, stumbled upon the old park ranger, who revealed he was the last of an ancient line of hunters, tasked with keeping the creature at bay. But it was too late. The ranger and Tabitha tried to fight off the creature, but as dawn approached, Tabitha realized she was alone, surrounded by the bodies of her friends and the ranger. The creature's glowing eyes were the last thing she saw before darkness consumed her. Blackwood Forest remained a place of terror, where the lurking fear preyed on those who dared to enter, and the ranger's warning was a faint echo of a doomed attempt to protect the innocent. Echoes of the damned. The Johnson family decided to spend a summer in their recently inherited cabin in Ravenwood Forest. The cabin had been abandoned for decades, but they saw it as a chance to reconnect and escape city life. "This place is perfect," Jack Johnson said, taking in the rustic charm of the cabin. "A little fixer-upper, but we can make it work." His wife, Lisa, nodded, though she felt a strange unease. Their teenage daughter, Karen, and young son, Timmy, were excited, exploring the surrounding woods with boundless energy. While cleaning the attic, they found an old diary belonging to a girl named Annabelle, who wrote about the forest spirits and the strange occurrences her family faced. Annabelle's entries became more erratic, ending with a cryptic warning. "They come with the night." "Do you think this is real?" Lisa asked, showing Jack the diary. "Probably just a story to scare kids," Jack replied, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. One evening, the youngest Johnson child, Timmy, went missing. They found him at the edge of the forest, staring into the trees, saying he heard voices calling his name. That night, strange noises surrounded the cabin, and the family felt an oppressive presence. "Timmy, what did you hear?" Karen asked, her voice trembling. "Voices," Timmy whispered. "They were calling my name." The whispers grew louder each night, and the once peaceful cabin felt like a prison. As days passed, each family member began experiencing terrifying visions. The father, Jack, saw ghostly figures in the woods. The mother, Lisa, heard whispers in the wind. Their teenage daughter, Karen, started sleepwalking, drawn towards the forest. "We need to leave," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "This place isn't safe." "But where will we go?" Jack asked, his face pale. "We've put everything into this cabin." Desperate, Jack researched the cabin's history and discovered it was built on the site of an ancient ritual ground where dark ceremonies were performed. He found an old book detailing a ritual to appease the spirits, requiring a blood sacrifice. "This is insane," Lisa said, her hands shaking. "We can't do this." "We have no choice," Jack replied, his voice grim. "It's the only way to save our family." In a final horrifying attempt to save his family, Jack decided to perform the ritual. As he began, the spirits grew more aggressive. The ground shook and the air filled with screams. The family was dragged out of the cabin by invisible forces, brought to the center of the forest. With no other options, Jack completed the ritual, sacrificing himself. The spirits momentarily retreated, but the cost was too great. The forest, now alive with dark energy, consumed the rest of the family. Their screams echoed through the trees, and Ravenwood Forest remained a place of terror where the damned souls of the Johnson family would forever be trapped, warning others who dared to enter. The Wolves of Oakwood. A team of biologists, Dr. Rachel Carter, Tom, Lisa, and Kevin, ventured into Oakwood Forest to study the behavior of a recently reintroduced wolf pack. The forest, located in the northern part of Minnesota, was vast and untouched, an ideal place for their research. "This is going to be amazing," Lisa said, excitement evident in her voice. "I've always wanted to study wolves in their natural habitat." Dr. Carter, the team leader, smiled. "Just remember, these are wild animals. We need to be cautious." The team set up camp near a known wolf den and began their observations. The wolves were elusive, but the biologists managed to capture glimpses of them through their binoculars. They noted the pack's behavior, tracking their movements and habits. One night, as they sat around the campfire, they heard howls in the distance. The sound was both eerie and beautiful, sending chills down their spines. "They're close," Tom said, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Let's hope they stay that way," Dr. Carter replied, though she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Over the next few days, the team's observations took a darker turn. The wolves exhibited strange behavior, often circling the camp at night, their eyes glowing in the firelight. The biologists found fresh kills near their camp, torn apart with a savagery that didn't match normal wolf behavior. "This isn't right," Kevin said, examining a carcass. "These injuries are too violent, even for wolves." Dr. Carter frowned. "Something's off. We need to document everything and be extra cautious." One night, as the team slept, the wolves attacked. They tore through the tents with a ferocity that was unimaginable. Tom was dragged into the darkness before anyone could react. The remaining team members huddled together, terrified, as the howls grew louder and more menacing. "We have to get out of here," Lisa whispered, her voice shaking. "Stay calm," Dr. Carter said, though fear gripped her heart. "We need to find Tom." They ventured into the forest, following the blood trail. The wolves' eyes glowed in the darkness, watching their every move. They found Tom's body near an ancient stone circle, his lifeless eyes staring up at the sky. The stones were covered in strange runes, and the air was thick with a sense of dread. Dr. Carter realized they had stumbled upon something far more sinister than a simple wolf pack. "This isn't just a wolf den," she said, her voice trembling. "It's some kind of ritual site." Kevin and Lisa looked around, their faces pale. "What do we do?" Kevin asked. "We need to leave," Dr. Carter replied. "Now." As they tried to leave, the wolves closed in. The team fought desperately, but the wolves were too strong, too coordinated. One by one, they were dragged into the darkness, their screams echoing through the forest. Dr. Carter was the last to fall, her final thoughts filled with horror as she realized the wolves were not just animals. They were guardians of an ancient curse, bound to protect the stone circle and its dark power. Oakwood Forest remained a place of terror, where the howls of the wolves were a warning to those who dared to enter. The biologist's notes were never found, and their disappearance became another unsolved mystery of the cursed woods. The lurking fear. 5 college friends, Tabitha, Jake, Julia, Matt, and Laura, went on a camping trip to Blackwood Forest, West Virginia, an area known for its mysterious disappearances. They set up camp near a picturesque lake, unaware of the forest's dark history. "This place is amazing," Matt said, setting up his tent. "It's so peaceful." "Yeah, but there's something eerie about it," Tabitha replied, looking around. As night fell, they built a campfire and shared stories. The forest seemed to close in around them, the darkness impenetrable beyond the flickering light of the fire. An old park ranger stopped by their camp, warning them not to wander too far from the main trails. He mentioned strange sightings and the disappearance of campers over the years. The friends laughed it off, thinking he was just trying to scare them. "You kids be careful," the ranger said, his face serious. "This forest has a way of swallowing people whole." "Thanks for the tip, but we'll be fine," Jake said, grinning. But as the ranger walked away, a sense of unease settled over the group. That night, they heard rustling outside their tents. Tabitha saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the campsite, but when she woke the others, it was gone. They found strange claw marks on the trees around their camp. "Did you see that?" Tabitha whispered, her heart pounding. "It's just your imagination," Jake said, though he didn't sound convinced. The rustling continued, growing louder. The friends huddled together, trying to ignore the growing fear. The next day, Jake and Matt decided to explore deeper into the forest. They found an old hunting cabin with a journal describing a creature that hunted in the forest, invisible to the eye but leaving a trail of fear and madness. The journal ended abruptly, with the writer begging for forgiveness. "This is creepy," Matt said, flipping through the pages. "Do you think it's real?" "Who knows?" Jake replied. "But we should be careful." As they made their way back to camp, they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As night fell, the friends felt an oppressive presence around them. Julia went missing, and when they found her, she was in a trance, muttering about the eyes in the dark. One by one, they started to see glimpses of the creature. Glowing eyes, a dark shape moving through the trees. "We need to leave," Tabitha said, her voice trembling. "Now." But the forest seemed to conspire against them. Paths that had been clear during the day were now twisted and unfamiliar. The creature's glowing eyes appeared closer, and the friends' panic grew. In a desperate attempt to escape, the friends ran through the forest, but the creature picked them off one by one. Tabitha, the last survivor, stumbled upon the old park ranger, who revealed he was the last of an ancient line of hunters tasked with keeping the creature at bay. But it was too late. The ranger and Tabitha tried to fight off the creature, but as dawn approached, Tabitha realized she was alone, surrounded by the bodies of her friends and the ranger. The creature's glowing eyes were the last thing she saw before darkness consumed her. Blackwood Forest remained a place of terror, where the lurking fear preyed on those who dared to enter, and the ranger's warning was a faint echo of a doomed attempt to protect the innocent. Echoes of the damned. The Johnson family decided to spend a summer in their recently inherited cabin in Ravenwood Forest. The cabin had been abandoned for decades, but they saw it as a chance to reconnect and escape city life. "This place is perfect," Jack Johnson said, taking in the rustic charm of the cabin. "A little fixer-upper, but we can make it work." His wife, Lisa, nodded, though she felt a strange unease. Their teenage daughter, Karen, and young son, Timmy, were excited, exploring the surrounding woods with boundless energy. While cleaning the attic, they found an old diary belonging to a girl named Annabelle, who wrote about the forest spirits and the strange occurrences her family faced. Annabelle's entries became more erratic, ending with a cryptic warning. "They come with the night." "Do you think this is real?" Lisa asked, showing Jack the diary. "Probably just a story to scare kids," Jack replied, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. One evening, the youngest Johnson child, Timmy, went missing. They found him at the edge of the forest, staring into the trees, saying he heard voices calling his name. That night, strange noises surrounded the cabin, and the family felt an oppressive presence. "Timmy, what did you hear?" Karen asked, her voice trembling. "Voices," Timmy whispered. "They were calling my name." The whispers grew louder each night, and the once peaceful cabin felt like a prison. As days passed, each family member began experiencing terrifying visions. The father, Jack, saw ghostly figures in the woods. The mother, Lisa, heard whispers in the wind. Their teenage daughter, Karen, started sleepwalking, drawn towards the forest. "We need to leave," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "This place isn't safe." "But where will we go?" Jack asked, his face pale. "We've put everything into this cabin." Desperate, Jack researched the cabin's history and discovered it was built on the site of an ancient ritual ground where dark ceremonies were performed. He found an old book detailing a ritual to appease the spirits, requiring a blood sacrifice. "This is insane," Lisa said, her hands shaking. "We can't do this." "We have no choice," Jack replied, his voice grim. "It's the only way to save our family." In a final, horrifying attempt to save his family, Jack decided to perform the ritual. As he began, the spirits grew more aggressive. The ground shook, and the air filled with screams. The family was dragged out of the cabin by invisible forces, brought to the center of the forest. With no other options, Jack completed the ritual, sacrificing himself. The spirits momentarily retreated, but the cost was too great. The forest, now alive with dark energy, consumed the rest of the family. Their screams echoed through the trees, and Ravenwood Forest remained a place of terror, where the damned souls of the Johnson family would forever be trapped, warning others who dared to enter. The Wolves of Oakwood. A team of biologists, Dr. Rachel Carter, Tom, Lisa, and Kevin, ventured into Oakwood Forest to study the behavior of a recently reintroduced wolf pack. The forest, located in the northern part of Minnesota, was vast and untouched, an ideal place for their research. "This is going to be amazing," Lisa said, excitement evident in her voice. "I've always wanted to study wolves in their natural habitat." Dr. Carter, the team leader, smiled. "Just remember, these are wild animals. We need to be cautious." The team set up camp near a known wolf den and began their observations. The wolves were elusive, but the biologists managed to capture glimpses of them through their binoculars. They noted the pack's behavior, tracking their movements and habits. One night, as they sat around the campfire, they heard howls in the distance. The Hidden Cavern. It was a humid summer evening when Jenna Johnson decided to venture into the woods surrounding her hometown of Pine Grove. The forest had always been a place of solace for her, a refuge from the stresses of daily life. However, this time, her exploration would lead her to a discovery far darker than she could ever have imagined. As she trekked deeper into the woods, she noticed a foul stench in the air. It grew stronger with each step until she stumbled upon a large, desolate garbage dump. The sight was revolting. Heaps of rotting waste, leaking barrels, and a large, murky pool of toxic water that reeked of chemicals. The dump seemed to have been abandoned for years, left to fester, and spread its poison into the surrounding environment. Intrigued and horrified, Jenna decided to investigate further. She noticed a series of tunnels carved into the earth, leading away from the dump. The entrance to one of these tunnels was hidden beneath a large, overgrown bush. Without a second thought, Jenna ducked under the branches and stepped inside. The tunnel was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of decay. As she ventured further, she realized that the tunnel system was extensive, winding deep beneath the forest. Eventually, she emerged into a large cavern. The sight that greeted her took her breath away. The cavern was filled with eerie, bioluminescent fungi that cast a ghostly glow over everything. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, dripping water into a pool of toxic sludge below. But what caught Jenna's attention the most were the creatures. They were unlike anything she had ever seen, pale, sightless beings that moved with an unsettling grace. Their skin was a sickly white, almost translucent, and they had no eyes. Instead, they seemed to rely on their heightened senses of smell and hearing to navigate the cavern. Jenna's heart raced as she watched the creatures from the shadows. They appeared to be feasting on the remains of an unfortunate animal that had wandered too close to the dump. She could see the creature's sharp teeth glinting in the faint light, tearing into the flesh with a methodical precision. It was a horrifying sight, and Jenna knew she needed to leave before they noticed her presence. As she turned to leave, she accidentally kicked a loose rock. The sound echoed through the cavern, and the creatures froze. Their heads swiveled in her direction, nostrils flaring as they caught her scent. Panic surged through Jenna, and she bolted back through the tunnel, her heart pounding in her chest. The creatures gave chase, their movements eerily silent except for the soft padding of their feet on the damp ground. Jenna could hear them gaining on her, their breath hot on her heels. She sprinted through the winding tunnels, desperately searching for an exit. Just as she felt their cold hands brush against her, she spotted a faint light up ahead. Summoning every ounce of strength, she lunged toward it and burst out into the open air. The creatures halted at the tunnel entrance, hissing in frustration as they retreated into the darkness. Gasping for breath, Jenna stumbled away from the dump, her mind reeling from the terror she had just experienced. She had to warn the others, to tell them about the creatures and the dangers lurking beneath the garbage dump. Back in town, Jenna tried to tell anyone who would listen about the horrors she had witnessed. But her wild-eyed account of blind, flesh-eating creatures living in the tunnels beneath the garbage dump was met with skepticism and disbelief. The townspeople dismissed her story as a figment of her imagination, a result of too much time spent in the woods. Desperate, Jenna turned to the local authorities, but they too were unconvinced. They saw her as a troubled young woman, perhaps suffering from a breakdown. The sheriff promised to send someone to check out the dump, but it was clear he didn't take her seriously. Frustrated and alone, Jenna decided to gather evidence herself. She returned to the forest with a camera, determined to document the creatures and prove that her story was real. She approached the dump cautiously, her camera at the ready. The stench was even worse than before, and she gagged as she approached the tunnel entrance. Steeling herself, Jenna descended into the darkness once more. She moved quietly, her camera capturing every detail. The cavern was just as she remembered it, the creatures still lurking in the shadows. She filmed them as they moved about, their pale bodies glistening in the eerie light. But just as she was about to leave, one of the creatures caught her scent. It let out a low growl, and the others turned in her direction. Jenna's heart skipped a beat as she realized she had been discovered. She bolted for the exit, but this time she wasn't fast enough. The creatures swarmed her, their cold hands grabbing her arms and legs. Jenna screamed, but there was no one around to hear her. They dragged her deeper into the cavern, their grip unyielding. She struggled against them, but their strength was overwhelming. They brought her to a small, dark chamber off the main cavern. The air was thick with the smell of rot and decay. In the dim light, Jenna could see the remains of other unfortunate victims, bones and scraps of clothing scattered across the floor. The creatures threw her down and began to bind her with vines and roots, securing her to the cold, damp ground. Jenna's mind raced as she tried to think of a way to escape. but the creatures were meticulous, ensuring she couldn't move. They sniffed at her, their breath hot and foul. She realized with growing horror that they intended to keep her alive, to feed on her slowly and keep her meat fresh. Days turned into a blur of pain and fear. The creatures would take turns gnawing at her flesh, their teeth tearing into her skin. The agony was unbearable, and Jenna's screams echoed through the tunnels. She could feel herself growing weaker, her will to fight slipping away. One night, as the creatures slept, Jenna noticed that one of the vines binding her had loosened slightly. Summoning what little strength she had left, she worked at the vine, tugging and twisting until it finally gave way. She moved slowly, careful not to make any noise that might wake her captors. When she was finally free, Jenna crawled through the tunnels, her body screaming in protest. She moved as quietly as she could, her senses on high alert. She had to get out of there before the creatures realized she was gone. After what felt like an eternity, she emerged into the open air. The cool night breeze was a welcome relief, and she took a moment to catch her breath. But she couldn't rest for long. She knew the creatures would be coming after her, and she needed to get as far away as possible. Jenna stumbled through the forest, her body battered and broken. She could hear the creatures behind her, their hisses growing louder as they closed in. Desperation fueled her movements, and she pushed herself to keep going. Just as she thought she couldn't go any further, she saw the lights of the town up ahead. With one final burst of energy, she sprinted towards the safety of civilization. She collapsed on the doorstep of the hospital, her vision fading as the door swung open and she was pulled inside. Everything went dark. Jenna awoke in a hospital bed, her body wrapped in bandages. She was alive, but the ordeal had left her scarred, both physically and mentally. She tried to tell the doctors and nurses about the creatures, but they looked at her with pity and disbelief. "No one believed me," she whispered to herself, tears streaming down her face. "No one believed me." The hospital staff did their best to comfort her, but it was clear they thought she was delusional. They attributed her injuries to a wild animal attack and her story to trauma-induced hallucinations. Jenna's protests grew more frantic, her mind unraveling as she realized that no one would ever believe the truth. The days in the hospital turned into weeks, and Jenna's mental state continued to deteriorate. She was plagued by nightmares, reliving the horror of her captivity every time she closed her eyes. The doctors decided she needed psychiatric care and transferred her to a mental health facility. In her new surroundings, Jenna became a shadow of her former self. She spent her days staring out the window, her mind lost in the memories of the creatures and the dark tunnels beneath the garbage dump. She knew the truth, but no one would listen. And so, the secret of the creatures remained buried beneath the forest, their existence known only to Jenna. The dump continued to leak its toxic chemicals, and the creatures thrived in the darkness, waiting for their next victim to wander too close. In the end, Jenna's story became just another ghost story, whispered among the townspeople of Pine Grove. But she knew the truth, and the memory of the creatures and their haunting lair would never leave her. She was a survivor, but her mind was forever trapped in the nightmare she had escaped. The Whispering Pines of Lost Creek Jackson Reynolds was no stranger to the lure of exploration. As a photographer fascinated by the untouched beauty of nature, he often found himself drawn to the depths of Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina. It was here, amidst the towering pines and the tranquil flow of Lost Creek, that Jackson sought solace and inspiration for his work. On a crisp autumn morning, Jackson set out with his camera and camping gear, determined to capture the essence of Lost Creek's whispering pines. The forest was alive with the colors of fall, vibrant reds, oranges, and yellows painting a breathtaking tapestry against the clear blue sky. As he ventured deeper into the woods, the scent of damp earth and pine needles filled his senses, a comforting reminder of the serenity found only in the heart of nature. Finding a secluded spot near the creek, Jackson set up camp and spent the day photographing the landscape. He captured the sunlight filtering through the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Every click of his camera felt like a tribute to the timeless beauty that surrounded him. As evening approached, Jackson noticed a peculiar phenomenon. In his photographs, subtle shadows seemed to dance among the trees, ethereal wisps that appeared and disappeared with each frame. Initially dismissing it as a trick of the light or perhaps a flaw in his equipment, Jackson continued shooting, intrigued by the mysterious presence. Night fell like a velvet cloak over the forest, and Jackson settled by his campfire, reviewing the day's photographs. The shadows in his pictures became more pronounced, taking on distinct forms, a silhouette here, a faint outline there. His curiosity piqued, Jackson resolved to investigate further, despite a lingering unease at the thought of what he might discover. As midnight approached, Jackson ventured deeper into the woods, guided by the faint glow of his flashlight. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence descended upon the forest, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. He sensed he was not alone, that unseen eyes watched his every move from the darkness. Suddenly, a soft whisper carried on the breeze, a voice so faint Jackson could barely discern its words. "Beware the shadows," it seemed to say, a warning tinged with a hint of urgency. Jackson's heart quickened, his senses on high alert as he scanned the dense underbrush for any sign of movement. A flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadowy figure darting between the trees. Jackson froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figure was humanoid, yet translucent, its features obscured by the veil of night. It beckoned to him, a silent invitation to follow deeper into the forest. Compelled by a mix of fear and curiosity, Jackson pursued the figure, navigating through thickets and across babbling brooks. The forest seemed to warp around him, familiar paths leading him astray as if controlled by an unseen force. He felt a growing sense of dread, a realization that he had stumbled upon something far beyond his understanding. Finally, he emerged into a small clearing bathed in moonlight, a sacred grove encircled by ancient pines. There, amidst the shadows, stood the spectral figure, a young woman with eyes that shimmered like stars. She spoke, her voice a melodic whisper carried on the wind. "I am Eliza," she said, her voice filled with sorrow. "Trapped between worlds, bound by an ancient curse that plagues these woods." Jackson listened, captivated by Eliza's tale of love and betrayal, of a forbidden romance that had sparked a feud between rival families centuries ago. Eliza had been caught in the crossfire, her spirit unable to find peace until the curse was broken and justice served. Determined to help Eliza find redemption, Jackson delved into Pisgah's archives, uncovering forgotten letters and journals that chronicled the feud's violent end. With each discovery, the forest seemed to come alive, echoes of the past resonating through the trees as if urging Jackson onward. One stormy night, under a canopy of whispering pines, Jackson and Eliza performed a ritual of release, a solemn ceremony that called upon the spirits of the forest to grant Eliza peace. The air crackled with energy as they spoke words of forgiveness and reconciliation, their voices blending with the howling wind. As dawn broke over Lost Creek, Jackson felt a sense of closure wash over him. He watched as Eliza's spirit shimmered in the morning light, her eyes reflecting gratitude and relief. With a final whisper of thanks, she faded into the ether, leaving behind a profound stillness in the grove. Jackson returned to civilization with a newfound reverence for the mysteries of nature and a deeper understanding of the interconnectedness between past and present. He vowed to honor Eliza's memory and preserve the sanctity of Lost Creek, ensuring that its whispering pines would continue to inspire and protect those who sought solace within their embrace. As time passed, Jackson continued to visit Lost Creek, capturing its beauty through his lens and sharing Eliza's story with those who ventured into the forest. His photographs became a testament to the enduring spirit of the place, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the world, redemption and peace could be found. Thus concludes the expanded version of The Whispering Pines of Lost Creek, where a photographer's journey into the depths of Pisgah National Forest leads him to uncover a centuries-old curse and find redemption amidst the haunting beauty of nature. The Haunting at Devil's Ridge. Ava Martinez had always been drawn to the mystique of the Redwood National and State Parks in California. As a seasoned park ranger with a keen interest in folklore and the supernatural, Ava often found herself contemplating the ancient trees and the secrets they held within their towering heights. Devil's Ridge, a remote and seldom visited area within the park, had long been rumored to be haunted. Stories whispered among locals spoke of unexplained disappearances and eerie lights flickering among the giant redwoods at night. Ava had heard these tales since she first started her career, dismissing them as fanciful myths meant to thrill tourists. One brisk autumn morning, Ava received a call about a missing hiker near Devil's Ridge. Concerned for the hiker's safety, Ava gathered her gear, a map, radio, and a trusted flashlight, and set out on the trail leading to the ridge. The air was crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the towering redwoods cast long shadows across the forest floor. As Ava hiked deeper into Devil's Ridge, a sense of unease settled over her. The forest seemed unusually quiet, devoid of the usual bird calls and rustling leaves. Occasional glimpses of movement among the trees caught her eye, but each time she turned to investigate, there was nothing but the swaying branches and shifting shadows. By late afternoon, Ava reached a clearing at the base of Devil's Ridge. The sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the forest floor. She spotted a weathered trail marker partially obscured by overgrown foliage, a sign that she was on the right path, but also a reminder of how easy it was to get lost in these dense woods. The temperature dropped noticeably as Ava climbed higher along the ridge, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. She checked her map more frequently, relying on her training to navigate the winding trails that crisscross Devil's Ridge like veins in a leaf. The disappearance weighed heavily on her mind, a reminder of the dangers lurking within the park's vast expanse. As dusk approached, Ava came upon an abandoned campsite nestled beneath the canopy of ancient redwoods. The fire pit was cold, and a tattered tent flapped in the evening breeze. Nearby, she discovered a journal filled with cryptic entries detailing strange sightings and unexplained phenomena, ghostly figures moving among the trees, disembodied voices calling out in the night. Ava's pulse quickened as she read further, piecing together a narrative of fear and desperation left behind by the journal's owner. The writer had ventured into Devil's Ridge in search of answers to local legends, only to become ensnared in a web of supernatural occurrences that defied rational explanation. She shivered despite the warmth of her jacket, sensing a presence watching her from the shadows. With nightfall descending like a heavy curtain, Ava made camp near the abandoned site, her radio crackling intermittently with static. She lit a small fire for warmth and illumination, casting flickering light across the surrounding trees. The forest seemed to come alive with whispered secrets, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Suddenly, a chill wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing Ava's fire with a gust of icy air. She turned toward the source of the disturbance, heart racing as a figure materialized from the darkness. A spectral form draped in tattered clothing, its eyes hollow and filled with a haunting sadness. Ava stood frozen in place, her instincts urging her to flee, while her curiosity compelled her to stay. The figure approached slowly, its movements graceful yet unnerving. It reached out a translucent hand, fingers curling as if beckoning Ava to follow into the depths of Devil's Ridge. Summoning her courage, Ava stepped forward, meeting the ghostly figure halfway. The air hummed with energy, a palpable tension that seemed to vibrate through the ancient trees. The figure spoke, its voice a whisper carried on the wind, a tale of betrayal and tragedy that had bound its spirit to Devil's Ridge for centuries. "I am Elias," the figure said, its voice echoing with sorrow. "Once a woodsman who dared to defy the ancient guardians of these woods, now cursed to wander as a restless spirit, seeking redemption for my sins." Ava listened, captivated by Elias's story of greed and treachery, a logging expedition gone awry, ending in bloodshed and a pact made with forces beyond mortal understanding. Elias had paid the ultimate price for his ambition, his spirit condemned to roam Devil's Ridge until justice was served. Determined to help Elias find peace, Ava delved deeper into the park's archives, uncovering forgotten records and eyewitness accounts that corroborated his tale. She learned of a hidden cavern deep within Devil's Ridge, said to be the resting place of an ancient artifact, a key to breaking Elias's curse and releasing him from his spectral prison. Armed with newfound knowledge, Ava ventured into the heart of Devil's Ridge, guided by Elias's ethereal presence and the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the dense canopy. She navigated treacherous terrain and avoided traps laid by malevolent spirits that sought to ensnare unwary travelers. At last, Ava reached the hidden cavern, a natural chamber bathed in a soft blue glow, emanating from a crystal embedded in the cavern's ceiling. She found the artifact, a simple wooden box inscribed with ancient runes, its contents a mystery that held the key to Elias's salvation. With trembling hands, Ava opened the box, revealing a delicate silver pendant, a symbol of peace and forgiveness. She placed the pendant around Elias's neck, its cool metal sending a surge of energy through his spectral form. The cavern filled with a blinding light, a manifestation of Elias's release from his centuries-old torment. As the light faded, Ava found herself standing alone in the cavern, the weight of centuries of suffering lifted from Devil's Ridge. She felt a profound sense of accomplishment and closure, knowing that she had helped Elias find peace and put an end to the haunting at Devil's Ridge. Ava returned to civilization with a newfound respect for the mysteries of the natural world and a deeper understanding of the bonds that connect the living and the dead. She continued her work as a park ranger, sharing Elias's story with visitors to Redwood National and state parks, ensuring that his spirit would be remembered as a guardian of the ancient forests he once sought to conquer. Thus concludes The Haunting at Devil's Ridge, where a park ranger's investigation into a series of disappearances leads her to confront a restless spirit and uncover the truth behind the supernatural occurrences in Redwood National and state parks. The Whispers in Shadow Hollow. Nathan Thompson had always been fascinated by the dense forests of Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. As an environmental scientist specializing in wildlife conservation, Nathan spent countless hours studying the park's diverse ecosystem and uncovering its hidden wonders. However, there was one area of the park that had always intrigued him: the mysterious Shadow Hollow. Shadow Hollow was known among park rangers and locals alike for its eerie silence and inexplicable phenomena. Nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains, the hollow was a labyrinth of ancient trees and winding trails that seemed to shift and change with each passing season. Nathan had heard whispered tales of strange lights flickering among the trees and unsettling whispers that echoed through the dense underbrush. Determined to unravel the mysteries of Shadow Hollow, Nathan embarked on a solo expedition one crisp autumn morning. Armed with his notebook, camera, and a sense of cautious curiosity, he ventured into the heart of the hollow, following a faint trail that wound deeper into the forest. The air was cool and tinged with the scent of fallen leaves, creating a carpet of gold and crimson beneath Nathan's boots. The canopy above filtered sunlight in dappled patterns, casting intricate shadows that danced along the forest floor. Despite the beauty surrounding him, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes observing his every move. As he delved deeper into Shadow Hollow, Nathan's senses heightened. He noticed peculiar rock formations and gnarled trees that seemed to twist unnaturally, their branches forming grotesque shapes against the sky. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Hours passed as Nathan explored the hollow, documenting unusual plant species and noting subtle changes in the ecosystem. The forest felt alive with a presence he couldn't quite define, a primal energy that pulsed through the ancient trees and rocky outcroppings. As twilight descended, Nathan discovered a clearing bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. The air grew colder, and a thick mist rolled in, cloaking the hollow in a shroud of mystery. He sensed he was nearing the heart of Shadow Hollow, where the whispers supposedly originated. Suddenly, a chill wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it faint murmurs that sent a shiver down Nathan's spine. The whispers were unintelligible yet unmistakably human, a chorus of voices speaking in hushed tones as if sharing secrets centuries old. Intrigued and unnerved, Nathan followed the whispers deeper into the hollow, guided by their elusive melody. He stumbled upon an ancient oak tree, its gnarled roots twisting into the earth like the fingers of a forgotten giant. Nestled within the tree's hollow trunk, Nathan discovered a weathered journal bound in leather, a relic of a bygone era. With trembling hands, Nathan opened the journal and began to read. The entries were written in a delicate script detailing the life of Lydia Monroe, a young woman who had lived on the outskirts of Shadow Hollow in the early 19th century. Lydia's words painted a vivid picture of her daily struggles and the hardships faced by her community, isolated from the outside world by the rugged terrain of the Appalachian Mountains. As Nathan read further, he uncovered Lydia's harrowing account of a series of mysterious disappearances that had plagued Shadow Hollow for generations. She described shadowy figures lurking among the trees and eerie lights that danced on the horizon during the darkest nights. Lydia had been determined to uncover the truth behind these phenomena, risking her own safety to protect her loved ones. Driven by a shared sense of curiosity and duty, Nathan continued to explore Shadow Hollow, piecing together Lydia's story with each new discovery. He stumbled upon crumbling ruins hidden beneath a thicket of brambles, a forgotten homestead that once belonged to Lydia's family, its walls echoing with the whispers of the past. One moonlit night, as Nathan stood amidst the ruins, a spectral figure materialized before him, a young woman with eyes that shimmered like emeralds. It was Lydia Monroe herself, her spirit bound to Shadow Hollow by unfinished business and an unrelenting desire for justice. "I am Lydia," she said, her voice a haunting echo of centuries past. "Trapped between worlds, seeking answers that have eluded me for so long." Nathan listened, captivated by Lydia's tale of resilience and sacrifice. She spoke of a curse that had befallen her family, a dark pact made with ancient spirits that had haunted Shadow Hollow since time immemorial. Lydia had vowed to unravel the mystery and break the curse, no matter the cost. Determined to help Lydia find peace, Nathan delved deeper into the Hollow's secrets, uncovering hidden symbols and forgotten rituals that held the key to lifting the curse. With each new revelation, the forest seemed to come alive with a renewed sense of purpose, a testament to the enduring strength of those who had come before. Together, Nathan and Lydia performed a ceremonial rite beneath the ancient oak tree, calling upon the spirits of Shadow Hollow to grant Lydia the closure she sought. The air crackled with energy as they recited ancient incantations, their voices blending with the rustling leaves and distant howls of nocturnal creatures. As dawn broke over Shadow Hollow, Nathan felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He watched as Lydia's spirit shimmered in the morning light, her eyes filled with gratitude and peace. With a final whisper of thanks, she dissolved into the mist, leaving behind a newfound tranquility in the hollow. Nathan returned to civilization with a deeper understanding of the interconnectedness between humans and the natural world. He continued his work as an environmental scientist, advocating for the preservation of Shenandoah National Park and sharing Lydia's story with those who dared to venture into the enigmatic depths of Shadow Hollow. Thus concludes The Whispers in Shadow Hollow, where an environmental scientist's exploration of a mysterious hollow in Shenandoah National Park leads him to uncover a centuries-old curse and forge a connection with a restless spirit seeking redemption. The haunting case detective Alana Parker had never fully recovered from the brutal murder of her best friend, Teri, 8 years ago. The case remained unsolved, a dark cloud hanging over her career and life. Every time she thought she had moved on, the memory of Teri's lifeless body would drag her back into despair. Her latest case, a series of disappearances near the outskirts of a remote town in the Pacific Northwest, brought those memories back with a vengeance. The investigation led her to an old morgue, long abandoned and decaying. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and rot. Alana walked through the empty corridors, their lengths stretching endlessly into darkness. Her footsteps echoed eerily, amplifying the sense of isolation. She had been following a trail of clues left by the latest missing person, a young woman named Jenna. As she reached the end of the corridor, Alana found a door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, she entered a room filled with rusty gurneys and broken medical equipment. The flickering light from her flashlight cast eerie shadows on the walls. In the corner of the room, she spotted an old, dusty filing cabinet. Alana rummaged through the files, hoping to find something that would help her piece together the mystery. Amid the yellowed papers and forgotten records, she found a map with a route leading deep into the woods, marked with an ominous X. Alongside the map was a photograph of a log cabin with a note scrawled on the back. "The answers lie here." Alana's instincts told her this was where the missing people were being taken. She took a deep breath and steeled herself for the journey ahead. The forest was dense and foreboding, but she knew she had to follow the map if she ever wanted to find out what happened to Jenna and to finally put Teri's spirit to rest. Following the map, Alana ventured into the dense forest. The path was overgrown and treacherous, but she pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that twisted and danced among the trees. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves put her on edge. After hours of hiking, she came upon a small, decrepit log cabin. It looked as though it had been abandoned for years, but recent footprints in the mud told a different story. The cabin was partially obscured by the thick underbrush, almost as if the forest itself were trying to swallow it whole. She cautiously approached the cabin, her hand resting on the gun holstered at her hip. The door creaked open under her touch, revealing a dark interior. Alana stepped inside, the wooden floorboards groaning beneath her weight. The air was damp and cold, sending chills down her spine. The cabin was sparsely furnished, with a rickety table and a few chairs. A musty, earthy smell permeated the room, mixing with the scent of decaying wood. In the corner, she spotted a trapdoor partially hidden under a worn rug. Alana lifted the trapdoor and found a set of stairs descending into darkness. Taking a deep breath, she descended into the unknown. The stairs led to a tunnel carved into the earth, winding deeper into the darkness. Alana's flashlight barely penetrated the gloom, casting long, dancing shadows on the rough walls. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, the air growing colder with each step. The walls were damp and slimy, and she had to brace herself against them to keep from slipping on the uneven ground. Finally, she emerged into a vast cave. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the cavern. In the center of the cave, she saw a makeshift altar surrounded by strange symbols painted on the ground. The flickering light from her flashlight illuminated the eerie scene, making the shadows seem to move and writhe. Alana approached the altar cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. The symbols on the ground seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and the air was thick with an oppressive energy. She had the unsettling feeling that she was being watched. As she examined the altar, she noticed several items placed upon it: a lock of hair, a small vial of blood, and a photograph of Jenna. Her mind raced with questions. What kind of ritual was being performed here? Who was behind it? And where were the missing people? A noise from the darkness behind her made Alana spin around, her flashlight sweeping across the cave. She saw a figure standing by the entrance to another tunnel, its back turned to her. Alana called out, but the figure didn't respond. She approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. As she got closer, the figure turned around, and Alana gasped in shock. It was Teri, her face pale and eyes empty, as if she were a ghost. "Teri," Alana whispered, her voice trembling. "Is it really you?" Teri's expression remained blank, her eyes devoid of any recognition. She turned and began to walk down the tunnel, her movements slow and deliberate. Alana followed, her mind reeling. How could this be happening? Teri was dead. She had seen the body herself. But here she was, leading Alana deeper into the darkness. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, winding and twisting like a serpent. Alana's flashlight flickered and sputtered, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. She felt a growing sense of dread, as if she were being drawn into a trap. But she couldn't turn back now. She had to know the truth. Teri's apparition led Alana through the tunnel, which eventually emerged into the basement of an old mansion. The place was in ruins, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and dust covering every surface. The air was thick with the scent of decay and neglect. Alana's skin prickled with unease as she made her way through the empty corridors that seemed to lead nowhere. The mansion was a labyrinth, each turn leading her deeper into the bowels of the decaying structure. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the floors were littered with debris. The faint sound of dripping water echoed through the halls, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Alana's flashlight flickered again, and she felt a cold presence behind her, but when she turned, there was nothing there. She reached a grand staircase and ascended to the main floor. The doors and windows were boarded up, trapping her inside. In the grand hall, she found an old photograph of the mansion's original owners, a wealthy family who had mysteriously disappeared decades ago. Among the faces in the photograph was Teri, looking exactly as she did the day she died. The sight sent a shiver down Alana's spine. How was it possible that Teri was connected to this place? As she continued to explore the mansion, she found more photographs and mementos that seemed to link Teri to the family who had once lived there. It was as if Teri had been a part of their lives, even though Alana knew she had never mentioned anything about this place. The deeper Alana delved into the mansion's secrets, the more she felt the walls closing in around her. The corridors seemed to stretch and twist, leading her in circles. Every time she thought she had found a way out, she ended up back where she started. It was as if the mansion itself were alive, toying with her, keeping her trapped within its decaying embrace. As Alana explored the mansion, she heard shuffling footsteps and low growls echoing through the halls. The sound sent chills down her spine, and she followed the noise, hoping it would lead her to some answers. She followed the sounds to a large ballroom, where she was met with a horrifying sight. A horde of zombies, their flesh rotting and eyes vacant, shuffled aimlessly around the room. At their head stood a figure that made Alana's blood run cold. It was Teri, or what was left of her. Her once beautiful face was now a grotesque mask of decay, and her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. She seemed to be leading the horde, directing their mindless movements. Alana's heart ached at the sight of her best friend turned monster. Teri's gaze locked onto Alana, and a cruel smile spread across her decayed lips. She raised her hand, and the horde lurched towards Alana. The detective drew her gun, but hesitated, unable to bring herself to shoot Teri. The zombies advanced, their growls growing louder and more menacing. Alana backed away, her mind racing for a way out. She fired at the zombies, trying to clear a path to the exit. But they kept coming, their numbers overwhelming. Teri moved closer, her eyes filled with malice and something else. Recognition. It was as if she remembered Alana, but the connection was twisted and perverted by whatever dark force controlled her. In a desperate bid to escape, Alana ran towards the grand staircase, but the zombies were too fast. They grabbed at her, their cold, clammy hands pulling her down. Alana screamed, but her cries were drowned out by the growls of the undead. As she fought against the horde, Teri reached out and touched her cheek. For a brief moment, Alana saw a flicker of the friend she once knew before darkness consumed her. The last thing she saw was Teri's face, twisted in a cruel semblance of a smile as the zombies closed in around her. Alana's strength began to wane as the horde closed in. She could feel their cold, decaying hands clawing at her, dragging her down into the darkness. Her flashlight fell from her grasp, its beam casting wild shadows on the walls before it flickered out entirely. She felt a sharp pain in her side as one of the zombies bit into her flesh, and she screamed in agony. Desperation fueled her final moments of resistance, but it was no use. The zombies were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. Alana's vision blurred, her body growing weaker with each passing second. In her final moments, she thought of Teri, the friend she had lost, the life that had been taken from her. She had hoped to find answers, to bring closure to the pain that had haunted her for so long. But now, as the darkness closed in, she realized that some mysteries were never meant to be solved. The mansion stood silent and abandoned, a grim monument to the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. The townspeople whispered of the detective who had vanished without a trace, and the ghosts who still roamed the empty corridors, forever trapped in a nightmare of their own making. The Unseen Guardian. The last boxes were finally loaded onto the moving truck. The once vibrant coastal home, now emptied, seemed like a ghost of its former self. Jax looked around, taking in the final moments of what had been his life until now. He was a teenager, his dark hair hanging over his eyes as he took one last glance at the horizon. The waves crashing against the shore had always been a source of comfort, but now they were a distant memory. The new house, tucked away in the dense woods of inland Massachusetts, felt like an alien world. "Jax, it's time to go," his father called out. His voice was weary, the strain of long work hours and the burden of raising two kids alone evident in his tone. Jax's little sister, Eleni, was already in the car, her privileged life barely touched by the upheaval. Jax felt a pang of jealousy mixed with protectiveness. The drive was long and winding, the coastal roads giving way to thick forests. Jax's thoughts drifted to his Yaya, his grandmother, the only one who seemed to understand him. She had always been his rock, her stories of the old country a bridge to his heritage. He would miss her more than anything. The new house was grand but cold. It stood at the end of a long path, surrounded by towering trees. The forest here felt different, older, as if it held secrets that had been buried for centuries. As they unpacked, Jax noticed the path leading deeper into the woods. He felt an inexplicable pull, a need to explore. A week passed before Jax finally ventured down the path on his motorcycle. The engine's roar echoed through the trees, a stark contrast to the silence of the forest. He sped along, the thrill of the ride momentarily washing away his unease. The path twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the woods. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around him. Jax came to a clearing and stopped, the bike idling beneath him. The place felt strange, the ground uneven and littered with stones. He dismounted, curiosity getting the better of him. As he walked, he noticed markings on the trees, ancient symbols he couldn't understand. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying a language he didn't know but felt deep in his bones. He spent hours there, losing track of time. It was only when the sun began to set that he decided to head back. As he turned to leave, he felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced back and saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the tree line. It was dark, featureless, and seemed to blend into the shadows. Jax's heart raced, and he quickly mounted his bike and sped back home. That night, Jax had dreams of the forest. He saw the figure again, standing among the trees, watching him. The dreams felt real, the fear palpable. He woke up in a cold sweat, the sheets tangled around him. He glanced at the clock. It was just past midnight. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. The days passed, but the dreams persisted. Each night, they grew more vivid, more terrifying. The figure seemed to come closer, its presence suffocating. Jax began to notice changes in himself as well. His dark hair, once his defining feature, started to show streaks of white. It was subtle at first, but soon it became undeniable. He tried to talk to his yaya about it during one of their phone calls, but he couldn't find the words. How could he explain something he didn't understand? Instead, he kept it to himself, hoping it would go away. One evening, Jax decided to confront his fears. He rode his bike back to the clearing, the path now familiar. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. He stopped at the edge of the clearing and waited. The figure appeared again, just as it had in his dreams. "Who are you?" Jax called out, his voice shaking. The figure remained silent, unmoving. Jax took a step forward, then another. The figure seemed to retreat, blending into the darkness of the forest. Determined, Jax followed, his fear replaced by a need for answers. He followed the figure through the woods, the trees closing in around him. The air grew colder, the shadows darker. He lost track of time, the forest becoming a maze. Just when he thought he would be lost forever, he stumbled upon an old cabin hidden deep within the woods. The figure was gone, but Jax felt its presence all around him. Jax approached the cabin cautiously. It looked abandoned, the wood rotting and the windows shattered. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. He explored the cabin, finding old furniture and remnants of a life long forgotten. In the corner of the main room, he found a journal. The pages were yellowed with age, the writing faded but still legible. It belonged to someone named Elias, who had lived in the cabin decades ago. The journal detailed strange occurrences, similar to what Jax had experienced. Elias wrote about the figure in the woods, the dreams, and the fear that consumed him. Jax read late into the night, the journal providing some answers, but raising even more questions. Elias had come to believe that the forest was cursed, the ground sacred and disturbed by the construction of the new house. The figure was a guardian of sorts, angered by the intrusion. Jax tried to process this information. The idea of sacred grounds and guardians seemed far-fetched, but the experiences he had were undeniable. The more he read, the more he felt a connection to Elias, as if their lives were intertwined by this mysterious force. Returning home, Jax's thoughts were consumed by the journal. The dreams continued, more intense than before. The figure's presence was overwhelming, and the streaks of white in his hair grew more pronounced. His father and Alana noticed the changes, but attributed them to the stress of the move. One night, unable to sleep, Jax decided to return to the cabin. He needed to understand more, to find a way to stop the haunting. The ride through the dark forest was harrowing, every shadow seeming to move, every rustle in the leaves a whisper. At the cabin, he delved deeper into the journal, discovering rituals and symbols Elias had described to appease the guardian. The entries spoke of offerings, of seeking forgiveness, and of understanding the sacredness of the land. Determined to end the terror, Jax decided to perform the ritual. He gathered the items Elias mentioned: fresh bread, olive oil, wine, and a small carved figure he found in the cabin. The ritual required him to go to the clearing at midnight and offer these items while reciting an ancient prayer. The night was eerily quiet as Jax made his way to the clearing. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy, casting long shadows. He set the items on a makeshift altar of stones and began the ritual. As he recited the prayer, the air grew colder, and the figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Jax's voice trembled, but he continued. The figure moved closer, and he could now see it more clearly. It was humanoid but otherworldly, with eyes that seemed to pierce through him. He finished the prayer and waited.